Alright, buckle up, because this situation is pure chaos. Just when people thought the Drake-Rocky tension couldn't get messier, Rocky apparently decided to kick the door wide open and air out one of Drake's deepest secrets. Allegedly, photos have surfaced showing Drake proposing to Rihanna back in 2016, and the internet is spiraling. Not only because of the proposal itself, but because of who exposed it and why. Let's be real, Drake's long-running fixation on Rihanna has never been subtle. For years, fans have called her the one that got away, and this revelation only adds fuel to that narrative. If the leaked images are legit, they explain a lot, especially the lingering bitterness people swear they still hear in Drake's tone whenever her name comes up. But Rocky? Oh, he didn't stop at receipts. His new song, Stole Your Flow, came packed with razor-sharp jabs, and suddenly the lyrics hit way harder. What once sounded like regular rap beef now feels deeply personal. The shade, the timing, the confidence, it all suggests this wasn't just about music. This was about history. Naturally, social media wasted zero time. Drake is getting roasted non-stop, and the jokes are flying at Olympic speed. Every old interview, lyric, and quote is being dragged back into the spotlight, and honestly, some clues were hiding in plain sight all along. Drake himself once admitted that he'd seriously considered proposing to 42 different women. Yes, 42. Instead of weddings, he ended up commissioning 42 engagement rings, which were later fused into a diamond-heavy necklace. His jeweler described it as a piece representing all the times he almost did it, but didn't, a jaw-dropping total of 351.38 carats. With what we know now, it's pretty clear Rihanna was one of those almost brides. And unlike anyone else, she seems to be the one he never truly moved on from. Fast forward to now, and everything circles back to Rocky's diss track. Lines about stolen flow, stolen women, and even surgical enhancements weren't random, they were deliberate. Especially that "stole your bar." If anyone somehow missed the target, the BBL reference erased all doubt. Those shots were aimed directly at Drake, no filter, no mercy. So what started as a song quickly turned into a full-blown exposé. Old obsessions, leaked moments, bruised egos, and unchecked pettiness, all colliding at once. And if this is just the beginning? Yeah, things are about to get way uglier. Let's be honest, by now, everyone has heard the whispers about Drake allegedly getting a BBL and sculpted abs. So when Rocky fired that particular shot, people were quick to accuse him of being messy, petty, and way too invested in dragging his partner's ex after a decade plus of history. But if you zoom out and actually connect the dots, the diss doesn't come out of nowhere. In a lot of ways, it feels like overdue payback. For nearly 10 years, Drake has been circling Rihanna and Rocky like unfinished business. He didn't just sneak subliminals, he went straight for the jugular more than once. There are multiple tracks where he threw shots not only at Rocky, but also at Rihanna and even their kids. And it wasn't ancient history either. On Family Matters, Drake made it very clear he was talking directly to Rocky, mocking his relevance, his career, and even his family life. The bars weren't clever digs, they were loaded, personal, and designed to humiliate. When you actually sit with the lyrics and unpack them line by line, it's obvious this wasn't friendly competition. This was resentment spilling out. And here's where it gets even messier, the timeline. Rocky had already publicly claimed his history with Sophie Brusso before Drake ever stepped into that situation. He didn't whisper it, he made sure people knew. That alone set the stage for tension. Drake's response wasn't to deny it, but to one-up it. His message was essentially, cool story, but I was the one actually with Rihanna. And in Drake's universe, that's the ultimate flex. Rihanna wasn't just another woman, she was the woman. So name-dropping her wasn't random. It was intentional, strategic, and meant to hit where it hurt. What's wild is how Drake has spun this entire saga as if he was wronged. As if Rihanna broke his heart out of nowhere. In reality, he spent years chasing her, declaring his feelings loudly and publicly, while she made it clear, again and again, that she wanted something casual. From the jump, Rihanna kept things light. No labels. No public claims. Just vibes. Yes, they worked together constantly. The chemistry was undeniable. Songs like What's My Name, Take Care, and Work made it obvious they had a natural spark. And every collaboration only fueled Drake's attachment. He wasn't subtle about it either. Interviews, award show speeches, lyrics, he wore his feelings openly. Anyone watching could tell he was far more invested than she was. When rumors started flying after they were spotted together, like the bowling alley moment, Rihanna shut them down immediately. Drake, on the other hand, leaned into the speculation. He even turned the moment into music, breaking it down in Fireworks, where he framed the situation as confusing, intimate, and unforgettable. To him, it was meaningful. To her, it clearly wasn't the same. The pattern continued. Drake spoke about Rihanna in interviews like she was his partner, even though she never once publicly claimed him, not in 2009, not ever. She kept him at arm's length, likely because she saw the warning signs early. The drama. The ego. The emotional instability that seemed to trail him everywhere. And then came the final straw, she found out he cheated. After that, the relationship, and even the friendship, was done. Rihanna later summed it up perfectly: they weren't friends anymore, but they weren't enemies either. Just, finished. And knowing how loyal Rihanna is to the people in her life, that cutoff speaks volumes. This is someone who once gave Chris Brown another chance. So for her to permanently close the door on Drake? Whatever happened clearly crossed a line. You'd think that would have been enough for him to accept reality and move on. But no. Instead, Drake clung to the fantasy. He went as far as telling LeBron that he had to mourn the idea of marrying Rihanna and starting a family with her, as if it were some tragic love story rather than a one-sided dream she never agreed to. When Rihanna finally cut him off completely, everything changed. No ambiguity. No late-night hope. No imaginary door left cracked open. She moved on decisively, and not quietly. She chose Rocky. Out in the open. With confidence. With peace. Like she had nothing left to explain. And that is when Drake truly unraveled. At first, the bitterness was subtle. A slick line here. A pointed glance there. But over time, the restraint vanished. The jealousy got louder. The resentment turned reckless. This wasn't just rejection, it was replacement. Rocky represented everything Drake wasn't in that moment: grounded, secure, unbothered, and genuinely chosen. Instead of processing that loss privately, Drake did what he always does when his ego takes a hit: he took it straight to the booth. When fear of heights dropped, the tension was unmistakable. The energy wasn't playful or competitive. It was sharp, defensive, bitter. And the shots aimed at Rihanna were especially uncomfortable. Lines dismissing her, minimizing intimacy, rewriting history to make it seem like he walked away first. It all felt forced. Like someone trying to convince himself more than the audience. By the time he started framing himself as anti and emotionally untouched, listeners weren't buying it. Because if there was truly nothing there, he wouldn't still be rapping about it. And that's the thing, this was never just about music. This was about ego, obsession, rejection, and watching the woman you couldn't lock down build a life with someone else, while you're still talking about what could have been. That wasn't competitive lyricism or clever sparring, that was ego damage bleeding through a microphone. And no matter how many times he insisted he was over it, the obsession with saying it gave him away. People who've truly moved on don't need to keep declaring their freedom. They don't circle old names, revive dead situations, or disguise resentment as nonchalance. What came through wasn't confidence, it was revisionism. A man trying to rewrite the past so he wouldn't have to face the fact that he didn't win. And Rihanna wasn't the only target. Rocky caught his share too, even if the shots were wrapped in sarcasm. Drake framed him as someone trapped by love, domesticated, too settled, too committed. He laughed at vacations, stability, family life, like those were weaknesses instead of growth. He joked about island trips, cozy domestic moments, anti-energy, as if building a grounded life was something to be embarrassed about. But to anyone listening closely, it didn't sound like mockery. It sounded like projection. Drake wasn't clowning Rocky, he was soothing himself. Because here's the part that stings the most: Rocky was living the life Drake once imagined for himself. Rihanna didn't just pick another man, she picked calm. She chose someone who didn't try to control her, humiliate her, or turn shared history into ammunition. Someone who respected her autonomy instead of punishing her for it. And that choice cut deep. Not because Rocky outperformed Drake in fame or money, but because Rihanna chose him cleanly. No hesitation. No limbo. No, almost. Just certainty. For years, Drake kept poking at both of them. Subliminals buried in verses, comments in interviews, little lyrical callbacks that always found their way back to Rihanna. Even after she made it clear she was done, he refused to let the story end. And for the longest time, Rocky said nothing. He let the noise happen. Let Drake talk himself in circles. Let the internet speculate. Silence, after all, can be brutal, especially when the other person keeps revealing themselves. But eventually, restraint runs out. And when Rocky finally responded, it wasn't out of jealousy, it was about respect. Drake wasn't just throwing petty shots anymore, he was crossing lines. Not just disrespecting Rihanna, but the family she was building. So Rocky didn't scream. He didn't rant. He didn't trade diss tracks. He did something colder. He revealed the proposal. In one calm, controlled move, the entire narrative shifted. Drake wasn't just a bitter ex tossing bars, he was someone who once planned to marry Rihanna and didn't get the chance. That single truth reframed everything. Suddenly, the "I'm anti" energy sounded hollow. The insults felt defensive. The jokes about Rocky being stuck or unable to leave. Pure envy. Because Drake had wanted permanence with her, and never got it. Rocky did. That's why the backlash came fast. Drake's fans scrambled, accusing Rocky of obsession, of dragging up old history for no reason, of being messy. But the timeline tells a different story. Drake had been instigating for years. Rocky simply ended the conversation in one sentence. No drama. Just facts. What made it worse was that Rocky didn't need exaggeration. He didn't need insults or theatrics. The truth alone did the damage. Knowing Drake once envisioned a future with Rihanna, and now has to watch someone else live it, is a loss no chart position can fix. No accolades can numb that. That's personal. And people saw it. Almost overnight, the tone shifted. Sympathy dried up. Old interviews resurfaced. Lyrics were re-examined. Patterns became obvious. When Drake isn't chosen, he spirals. When a woman moves on decisively, he unravels. And instead of healing, he lashes out, hiding behind bravado, masking insecurity with sarcasm. Rihanna, meanwhile, said nothing. She didn't need to. She was busy living her life. Raising her family. Thriving. And that silence spoke louder than any diss track ever could. Because the real flex isn't pretending you're unbothered, it's actually being at peace. Rocky understood that. Which is why his response didn't feel angry. It felt final. He didn't expose the proposal to score points. He did it to draw a boundary. To say, this story is over. Stop speaking on a woman you no longer have access to. Stop dragging my partner into feelings you never resolved. And with that, the door didn't just close. It locked. And Drake? He was left holding the bag, lyrics that aged like milk, a storyline that slipped completely out of his control, and fans bending themselves into knots trying to justify behavior that was clearly driven by envy. The irony is, none of this was inevitable. If he had accepted the loss with grace, if he had allowed Rihanna to move on without turning that pain into resentment, this wouldn't be the stain attached to his name in this chapter. But instead, he leaned into spite. He chose bitterness. He chose to swing low. Because when you strip everything back, this was never about records, charts, or lyrical dominance. It was about ego. About rejection. About not being able to accept that sometimes, love simply doesn't pick you. Rocky didn't win because he talked the loudest. He won because he barely spoke at all, and when he finally did, he said only what mattered. That's why this entire saga will haunt Drake far more than he'll ever publicly admit. Now that the pieces are finally lined up, Drake's lingering hostility makes painful sense. This wasn't industry rivalry or competitive tension. This was intimate. Personal. And once you connect the dots, the lyrics, the interviews that felt oddly emotional, the passive-aggressive jabs, the inability to move forward, the truth becomes unavoidable. Drake didn't just lose someone he loved. He lost the future he had already imagined for himself. And watching another man step into that life effortlessly, without pleading or performing for approval, is the kind of loss that doesn't fade quietly. For years, Drake cast himself as the tragic romantic, the man who loved deeply, publicly, dramatically, yet somehow never got chosen. Rihanna became central to that image. She wasn't just an ex, she was the symbol of unfinished destiny. The almost. The story he refused to close. He preserved her in music, speeches, grand gestures, and emotional oversharing that blurred sincerity with spectacle. Every mention felt like an attempt to keep the door ajar, to convince the world, and himself, that their chapter was paused, not finished. But time didn't pause. And neither did Rihanna. Rocky didn't arrive as some dramatic interruption. He was already there, steady, unflashy, detached from the chaos. No public declarations. No theatrical vulnerability. No insistence that he deserved her. Just consistency. Calm. Assurance. While Drake tried to force a narrative into existence, Rocky allowed one to grow naturally. And that difference changed everything. When Rihanna chose Rocky, it wasn't explosive or messy. It was quiet. Grounded. Intentional. And that calm cut deeper than scandal ever could. Because it exposed the truth Drake didn't want to face, she didn't leave turbulence to compromise, she left it to find peace. That's where the resentment really takes shape. Drake didn't just want Rihanna. He wanted the validation of being chosen by her. He wanted the ending where persistence is rewarded, where longing triumphs, where public devotion eventually wins the prize. Rihanna choosing Rocky shattered that fantasy. It made one thing painfully clear: love isn't about how intensely you want someone. It's about how secure they feel with you. Rocky never competed. Never postured. Never pleaded. And that effortless confidence was the real flex. So when the alleged proposal surfaced, it didn't feel shocking, it felt explanatory. Suddenly, years of subliminals, emotional backsliding, and recycled bitterness snapped into focus. Drake wasn't reminiscing. He was stuck. frozen in the moment where he believed life would eventually bend his way. And when it didn't, he didn't let go, he just kept circling the same emotional space, hoping repetition would turn longing into fate. But fate doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to alignment. Rihanna and Rocky didn't just fall in love, they matched. Friendship became partnership. Partnership became family. And the ease of that evolution stood in sharp contrast to Drake's decade-long emotional stalemate. One man was still reopening old wounds. The other was building a future. And that's where jealousy morphs into something even harder to swallow: irrelevance. Drake's story depended on Rihanna remaining unfinished business. Rocky closed the book. Completely. Children. Stability. Legacy. There were no what-ifs left to exploit. And for someone who thrives on ambiguity, on being the lingering possibility, that finality is devastating. What makes it all more striking is how little Rocky had to say. No victory speeches. No taunts. No explanations. Because real power doesn't need narration, it simply exists. And in that quiet, Drake's noise grew louder, more strained, more revealing. Every bitter lyric. Every forced bravado moment. Every unnecessary callback to the past began to feel less like art and more like unresolved grief. Not grief over a relationship, but grief over an identity that never came to be. The man who believed he would be the one, realizing too late that he never was. This story isn't really about leaked photos or gossip-fueled drama. It's about emotional maturity versus fixation. About what happens when one person moves forward and another refuses to stop looking back. About the truth that love isn't earned through persistence alone, but through timing, mutual readiness, and respect. Rocky didn't just end up with Rihanna. He honored her autonomy. He met her where she was, not where he wanted her to remain. He didn't romanticize struggle, he offered stability. And in doing that, he didn't just become her partner. He became the standard. Drake, in the end, didn't come out as a villain or a victim, he came out as a warning. Proof that talent, fame, and public love don't protect you from loss if you refuse to grow. If you keep chasing a version of the past that no longer exists. If you confuse fixation with loyalty and visibility with real love. Because the truth is, Drake doesn't seem bitter because Rocky took Rihanna from him. He seems bitter because Rocky demonstrated, quietly, effortlessly, that everything Drake tried to orchestrate could have unfolded naturally. Not through pressure. Not through persistence. But through trust, patience, and emotional freedom. And realizing that, especially in front of the entire world, is a humbling blow no success can soften. That's why the tension never fully faded. That's why the shade kept resurfacing. That's why the energy stayed heavy long after the relationship was over. Drake didn't just lose a woman, he lost control of the story he had been telling himself for years. And the most painful part? Rocky didn't need to argue, defend himself, or even respond. He just lived. He loved his partner openly. Built a family without spectacle. Moved forward without looking back. And by doing so, he rewrote the narrative entirely. That wasn't a diss. It was a rewrite. And once a story gets rewritten, the original version doesn't matter anymore. There's no reclaiming it. No remixing it. No forcing yourself back into the ending.